So in this video we're just going to briefly look at the poem Maude Clare by Christina Rossetti. So obviously it focuses on the character of Maude Clare throughout, which is interesting being as we're set at the wedding of Nell and Lord Thomas. So Maude Clare being the focus obviously subverts our expectations very early on. Now at the time of writing, Rossetti was engaging quite closely with a group called Langham Place, whose main desire was to improve the rights for women during the Victorian period. At that time, marriage was central to maintaining what was seen as a stable society, and women who chose to get married would sacrifice their possessions, would sacrifice their wealth to their husband, and so therefore would lose power completely and become subservient to that husband. But being single wasn't a legitimate choice for women at this time. Unmarried women would be marginalised from the society, and this poem seeks to sort of break that traditional view that marriage would be based on love, but more presents a marriage based on convenience at the detriment of a relationship which seems to be based on something much more romantic. So in terms of form, this poem is written as a ballad, which traditionally would have followed an A-B rhyme scheme. Now, just like much else in this poem, Rossetti plays with that and subverts that, and instead chooses an A-B-C-B rhyme structure, which just challenges that expectation and maybe creates an uncomfortable atmosphere for us as a reader or as an audience, and therefore sets that tension that would be taking place at the event of this awkward marriage. Now the title itself is interesting. Obviously at the wedding of such a beautiful young couple as we have here, this would be the expected focus. Instead, our title brings focus to this lady here, to Maude Clare, and she retains that focus throughout. Okay, so if we get into the main body of the poem, we're going to explore just the introduction of the character of Maude Clare herself. So if we look at just some of the language that is used to describe her very early on, so lofty and main, those words are suggesting her sort of power, maybe almost a sense of arrogance as she's walking out of the church behind these two characters of Sir Thomas and Nell. And this idea of her following them has, in itself sort of seems sort of quite a negative and frightening omen of her just casting a shadow maybe over their special day. And we're immediately given this juxtaposition between Maude Clare and the character of Nell herself. So when we look at these similes very early on, so Maude Clare being described as like a queen, in contrast to Nell, the bride herself, who should be sort of the focus and the beautiful one on this day, is described as like a village maid. And the juxtaposition that's created through these similes just draws attention to that contrast between these two characters in the mind of our writer Rossetti. Now the second and third stanzas then open up the poem to include other characters. So we've got the focus of Sir Thomas's mother here, and her words draw attention to maybe the presentation of society and the role of marriage within society in the Victorian times. So we've got a really interesting description for Sir Thomas's mother that she says with smiles but almost with tears, and the ambiguity of this line is one that's caused a lot of interest when analysing this poem. So if we're following the interpretation that Lord Thomas and Nell haven't married for love, could these tears be due to Lord Thomas's mother's knowledge of this and her upset that maybe her son's true love, Maude Clare, is never going to be part of his life? Is it, though, to do with this second line, or so this third line here, live as true as we have done for years? So if this is reference to the mother and father's relationship, of Lord Thomas, maybe this was a decision that she had to make as well. And so she sympathises with Thomas and Nell, who are marrying not for love, but for more of a financial agreement or a class agreement that is society, in terms of society, more expected or acceptable than maybe Maude and Thomas's relationship was. And this word true is quite an interesting one. Live as true. It's not live as happy or live as romantically or as passionately as the mother and father have, but live as true, live as more on agreeable terms maybe. And then this idea is further supported in our next stanza, so in stanza 3, where we've got your father had just your tale to tell. And so it seems that this same relationship is reflected in the mother and fathers as it is in Lord Thomas and Nell. So maybe this is a comment on society in general, where marriage, which is seen as something romantic and something to do for the one you love, in Victorian era wasn't that at all, and was common for people to get married more for financial arrangements or because the families desired it rather than it being a thing of love. So in stanza 4 and 5 we move on to the interaction between Maude Clare and Lord Thomas. And it's interesting to note that our narrator describes Lord Thomas twice as my lord, which that repetition emphasises his power, emphasises his status within the society, and maybe serves as a reminder of this patriarchal society, which means that although Maude and Lord Thomas's relationship is being exposed here, he seems to lose absolutely nothing through that and retains his power, whereas Maude Clare obviously loses that power and loses that reputation that she might have otherwise had. And it's interesting to note this desire that he still seems to have for Maude Clare. So even when kissing Nell, it's Maude Clare who he looks at, maybe Maude Clare who he wishes that he was able to kiss. So stanza 5, we see Maude Clare's first bit of speech, and she begins with this imperative lo, which means to look. So the command here, again, just emphasises that power that she has. So we've had the lofty step and mine early on, like a queen, and here her first spoken word is an imperative, to look. And she gets the attention, therefore, of Lord Thomas and of Nell as she presents them with her gifts. And the repetition of this word gift maybe is used to emphasise the irony. So the gift that she's giving is not one that we'd overly want. And these gifts maybe to display her indifference to the wedding or to reveal that anger that she has towards Lord Thomas for marrying Nell rather than her. And alongside these gifts that she's going to bring, she also wishes them or makes wishes for them. And these wishes to bless the hearth, to bless the board and to bless the marriage bed are traditional wishes that we might give at a wedding. So the hearth, the image of the fireplace, to bring warmth and comfort into that marriage, to bring prosperity, food and joy into the relationship through the board, and then with the marriage bed, obviously to bring children, which would be the expectation of a marriage in the Victorian times. And so by blessing these, we could read that as very positive, but clearly Maude isn't there to give these blessings really. And so the irony gives a sense of threat to Lord Thomas and Nell's relationship. She's going to be a constant presence within their relationship, damaging the warmth that she promises them, maybe coming in between that idea of family and prosperity, and certainly being a presence in the sexual relationship that's going to be happening between Lord Thomas and Nell. So finally, Maude gets around to giving the gifts that she's bought for this wedding, and she returns her half of a golden chain, and she gives her half of the faded leaves. And again, not only is this emphasising the fact that Thomas would have the other half, so a reminder of their past relationship. But maybe it's drawing attention to the sense of her heart being broken, the relationship being broken, and maybe the destruction that that Thomas has caused Maude through the ending of their relationship. And alongside that destruction that we've had earlier, we've got adjectives such as faded, which draws attention to this idea of decay, of things coming to an end, of things not being as beautiful as they once were. And then finally we hear from Thomas, a character that obviously we're expecting to hear from earlier as a powerful masculine figure, and here he seems to be everything but. So we're told that he strove to match her scorn with scorn, and that verb just emphasises the fact that he's unable to. He's completely lost for words and can't compete with Maude Clare, which just shows maybe the complexity of power that Rossetti's suggesting that men don't or shouldn't have all of the power, as was common within that society. And he attempts, again, we've got this repetition of the word scorn. He's attempting to assert himself within this situation to match Maude Clare, but he's unable to. And we've got poor Thomas here faltering, so unable to match Maude Clare. And we've got these hyphens which create a sense of caesura, which mimic that same pause that Lord Thomas is taking, unable to articulate the words that he wants to, and maybe the comebacks that he's desperate to be able to make. So again here, Rossetti is drawing attention to this theme of power, the expectation that men would have it and women would lack it is being completely subverted here. Maude Clare taking a dominant role and Lord Thomas just being left to stumble over his words, like I am. And as with the faded leaves, Rossetti works to create a semantic field of decay and things not being as fantastic as they used to be. So Maude Clare presents gifts now to Nell, and the gift that she has for Nell, were it fruit, the blooms were gone. Were it flowers, the dew, the freshness it once had, has left it. So the gift that she's going to give is diminished from what it used to be. And that gift, of course, is Lord Thomas's heart. So Maude Clare is suggesting the heart that she is now presenting to Nell is in some way less than the one that Thomas gave to her previously. Now, the fact that she's giving Nell, or chooses to give Nell this heart, again seems to put her in a position of power, a commanding role where she chooses to give the heart to Nell. Obviously, as a reader, we're aware that it's actually no choice of hers at all, but that presentation is really interesting. As are the adjectives that are used to describe the heart. So we've got fickle, and then the paltry love. And it just has that real sort of tone of contempt that Maude Clare is now feeling towards Lord Thomas. And she says she's completely washing her hands. So this metaphor of washing your hands of someone, she wants no more to do with him. Whether you fully believe that or not is completely up to your interpretation. Now, we talked in the previous section about Lord Thomas's caesuras, the pauses in his line, and that's not simply just Lord Thomas who pauses as he speaks. If we have a look at Maude Clare's speech, we've got punctuation which causes pauses in her lines also, and yet these pauses seem to have much more power and control to them. They are chosen rather than accidental, as she's stumbling over words. I have a gift for you, mine of a paltry love. Those pauses and add conviction to her statements, whereas they used to, or in Lord Thomas's, seem to add a lack of conviction. So our last two stanzas are devoted to the voice of Nell, who so far has been absolutely silent in in the poem and has been accepting, therefore, of the scorn of Maude Clare. And her reaction is a really interesting one. So, in the tone here, and what you leave, said Nell, I'll take, and what you spurn, I'll wear. She seems to accept the gifts, and therefore Lord Thomas, with a quiet pride almost. So she echoes the marriage vows here. So he's my lord for better and worse, so for better or for worse from the marriage vows. And so is this Nell quietly asserting her victory? Is it that through marriage she feels that she's won over Maude Clare and therefore doesn't have to almost fight back with the scorn? Is this a sense of female resilience? So women were expected to accept what was given to them quietly and to remain stoic, so remain outwardly strong, no matter what emotions they're feeling underneath. Is this simply an example of that? So again, this is open to your interpretation. Is it Nell being a powerful woman and therefore accepting the circumstances and situation and making the best of it and claiming victory? Or is this, as a woman, Nell simply accepting her place? And she seems to accept, if nothing else, the fact that Maude is more attractive than her. So you're taller by the head, more wise and much more fair. But then we've got this line, I love him until he loves me best. So is Nell confident this will happen? So one day Lord Thomas will love her best? Or is it the fact that she's very aware that currently Lord Thomas doesn't love her best and in fact loves Maude Clare best, but through time she expects that love for Maude Clare to diminish? Or the fact that she has society on her side and the marriage between Nell and Lord Thomas is the true marriage, the true match and the right match, that she believes that will secure her for the rest of her life. But it definitely suggests that this marriage isn't for love. So the marriage between Nell and Thomas isn't one based on love because he simply loves Maude Clare more. Now the final line, me best of all Maude Clare. Is this a little bit of a fight back finally from Nell, the use of Maude Clare? Or is it that we're left as a reader, as an audience, with Maude Clare on our mind? So is this final stanza a reminder that Maude Clare is actually the more dominant one? Or do we actually feel some sympathy for Nell in these lines? And is that Rossetti's intention? We know that Rossetti wants us to sympathise with powerless women or outsiders, women who have been cast out from society, and she certainly wants us to sympathise with Maude Clare or to understand Maude Clare. Does she also, in these final two stanzas, want us to sympathise a little bit with Nell as well? So Nell, who's had maybe no choice but to accept this marriage. Nell, who is very aware that Thomas loves someone else more, but is marrying him anyway. So this poem is an absolutely fascinating one in terms of the presentation of women. Maude Clare really subverting the traditional stereotypes of women being passive, women being merely accepting of their position in society and certainly within relationships, and really challenging those notions of gender and gender expectation. Now, due to the nature of this poem being absolutely full of dialogue, the pace and the excitement, the action of this poem is heightened through that. And it really works in terms of Rossetti presenting marriage not as the traditional idea of a state of fulfilled love and an establishment that celebrates romance. Instead, marriage here is presented as an agreement, a contract almost between people, completely devoid of that love. And we're also presented with a woman who has almost rejected marriage, therefore presenting this idea that being single as a woman was not a legitimate choice at this time. Rossetti's undermining the whole notion of marriage, which sort of fits in with her thinking at this time of empowering women. Obviously, marriage being an establishment which actually at that time reduced the power and status of women. They would have to turn over their possessions to their husband. They would turn over decisions to their husband. And therefore, through rejecting marriage, Maude Clare is ostracised by society, but actually retains some power for herself, and certainly power over Lord Thomas.